Let's bring in criminal defense attorney Stacey Schneider. And Stacey, you say today's indictment reads like a mob indictment. What was most shocking to you of all these allegations?
Yeah, the fact, Jake, that the government in this indictment presented evidence alleging that Sean Combs was running a criminal enterprise, and they actually named it in the indictment, the Combs Enterprise. And they said that this enterprise consisted of him as the alleged leader, his employees, assistants, staff, allegedly, that were able to procure women and alleged male sex workers to engage in performances for his own sexual gratification. Where it differs from a mob indictment, it has all the elements of putting together this racketeering allegation of all these moving pieces using resources from his businesses. But the fact that this is about an allegation of sexual gratification being accomplished by alleged human trafficking, it's one of the most unique indictments I've ever seen in this area, in the area of sex crimes, because the government isn't actually prosecuting the sex crimes other than the human trafficking or the sex trafficking. They're not prosecuting any type of alleged sexual abuse to women, although that's part of this racketeering scheme. But the actual charges are racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transporting individuals over state lines to engage in prostitution. The reasoning around all of this, his alleged motivation as presented in that indictment by the government is for his own personal gratification. And that's just the strangest type of indictment I've ever seen. But I agree with you. This indictment it's very disturbing. The facts presented are out of a very bad Hollywood story. Whoa. And a lot of the evidence, alleged evidence, that's been gathered in this case was from those two raids that were conducted on his personal homes in Miami and Los Angeles. And the indictment names the things seized that he allegedly made videos of these sexual performances that have been named freak-offs. And there seems to be a ton of evidence allegedly tying this scheme together. So it's an interesting way of prosecuting it, but I understand why they did it that way.
So what did you make of what Elizabeth Wagmeister just reported? And obviously, Sean Diddy Combs and his attorneys they're going to get their day in court. But the idea that the government, in their characterization, does not say that anybody did any of these things non-consensually. What do you make of that?
I make of that as being a big flaw already in the government's case, which the defense was quick to point out. Even if he
Here's the thing. Everybody's talking about, oh, Diddy's in trouble now that there's video. If they don't show what everyone thinks that they will show, Diddy forcing, coercing, right? And it shows people actively participating in these freak-offs from consenting adults, it may actually help his case. Do I think so? Hell no. I think Diddy is as guilty as goddamn sin. To me, the shocking part in all of this is that people are shocked that Diddy has the capability of doing this. We all saw that video of him beating up Cassie. This man is the damn devil. The judge needs to destroy Diddy. He's the very definition of power, evil, and corruption all rolled into one.
He was engaging in this alleged conduct. There was no allegation or no statement in that indictment saying that any of these alleged victims or alleged witnesses willingly participated in some of these acts that people find offensive, that sound to be offensive. And that's a very important part of the case. What was the consent? But there are enough charges here where outside of what the alleged victims are going to say about how he was using the resources allegedly from his enterprises, his businesses, his well-known bad boy entertainment, his clothing line resources, his liquor line resources. Allegedly, there were funds used from that resources to engage in this alleged prostitution activity across state lines. And that's why it's a federal case, because it's across straight lines. So there are some problems that the defense has brought up originally, but it seems like, just from reading this 14-page indictment, that there is enough physical evidence to perhaps get a conviction in this case. We shall see. These are allegations.
So the Office of the Southern District of New York seems awfully confident about their ability to handle the scope and complexity of the case. But still, why do you think it took them so long for them to go after Combs, considering they allege his crimes have been going on for more than a decade?
My theory is that the government had an easy time putting together this final prosecution because of all the civil actions existing against Sean Combs right now.
Yep.
The case with Cassie, which that video was shown, his former girlfriend, where he was seen assaulting her. It looked like certainly that he was assaulting her on video. I think the government and investigators were able to accumulate all this easy evidence that was just handed to them from the attorneys who prepared the civil cases that are now pending against him. I think things just started piling up, and eventually Sean Combs got to a place where his luck ran out, and therefore he was indicted and arraigned.
We're going to fight this case with everything we have, as is he, and eventually he's going to be shown to be innocent.
That was the attorney for music mogul Sean Diddy Combs vowing to fight for Combs after a judge denied the rapper and music mogul bail and ordered him to stay in federal detention until the beginning of his criminal sex crimes trial. Combs faces 3 federal charges: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Combs has pleaded not guilty to those charges. In an unsealed indictment, prosecutors allege Combs, quote, abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct, unquote. It goes on to say, quote, on numerous occasions from at least in or about 2009 and continuing for years, Combs assaulted women, among other things, striking, punching, dragging, throwing objects at, and kicking them, unquote. Combs has been for years a celebrated artist. His work is credited with growing the hip-hop genre and cultivating top artists such as Christopher Wallace, better known as Notorious B.I.G. And now Combs is obviously a criminal defendant. CNN's Ellie Honig, who used to work as a prosecutor for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, joins us now. Ellie, as he was leaving court for the day, Combs' attorney said they're appealing the decision on bail. How likely is that appeal to succeed?
Right, Jake. So people understand what happened. The judge who made the decision today was a magistrate judge. That is essentially a judge who handles ministerial tasks, initial appearances. Tomorrow, the defense will take the case to the district judge. That's the judge who will handle this case all the way through trial. If I had to guess, I would say the district judge will agree with the magistrate judge and keep Sean Combs locked up. First of all, the law says that when a person's facing the charges Sean Combs is facing, the presumption is that he gets locked up pending trial. So the field is automatically tilted in the prosecution's favor. He is looking at a minimum of 15 years behind bars if he's convicted. The prosecutors argue that. And finally, prosecutors argued intensely that Sean Combs is engaged in constant obstruction of justice, intimidating witnesses, bribing witnesses,
keep him in there.
And that usually strikes a chord with judges when they're considering bail.
Not only do they got to keep him in there, but I legitimately think it was his last day on free soil.
What do you make of the charges and the indictment? Does it seem solid to you? One of the responses from Sean Combs' defense team seemed to be they don't have anybody who alleges that they did anything non-consensual.
Yeah, I don't get that read out of the indictment. Of course, we're hearing from both sides. Now, it strikes me as a strong indictment. We do have to keep in mind it's a one-sided document. It's the prosecution's allegations. But a couple things jump out to me. First of all, they have videotape. We've all seen the videotape of the assault on one of those women who's alleged to be a victim. That's going to be a really tough piece of evidence for the defense. And if you look beyond the indictment, there was a companion document filed today that says that prosecutors have talked to and plan to call dozens of victims and witnesses. So even if the defense can discredit 1 or 2 or 3, they're going to have to deal with dozens of victims pointing the finger at Sean Combs.
They got to call Usher. They got to call Justin Bieber. They got to call everyone from Making the Band, Danity Kane, Dylon. But here's my thing, though. They need to do 25-hour, 8-day-a-week surveillance on Diddy while he's in there so no future Epsteins occur.
So you used to specialize in prosecuting racketeering cases at this U.S. Attorney's Office. How exactly do racketeering charges play out here, and how does it give prosecutors an advantage?
Racketeering charges are such a powerful weapon for prosecutors, and I used to use that tool quite effectively, I think. What prosecutors have done here is allege that Sean Combs was at the head of an organization, a racketeering organization, a criminal enterprise that committed multiple crimes that were connected to one another. And what that allows you to do as a prosecutor is to pour in evidence of all manner of crimes. And here prosecutors allege that Sean Combs committed this enterprise by committing assault, extortion, drug trafficking, with firearms offenses, with obstruction of justice. And so you end up as a prosecutor able to put this massive evidence of various types of crimes in front of a jury. So it's a lot for defense lawyers to respond to, and it really is an advantage for prosecutors if they can prove the core allegations.
You're familiar with not only this prosecutor's office, but the judge assigned in this case. Tell us about them.
Yeah, so Judge Andrew Carter, first of all, is assigned to this case. He was a magistrate, as I mentioned before, in Brooklyn before this. His background primarily has been as a defense lawyer. He was a longtime public defender. He's deeply respected in the New York legal community. The prosecuting office here is the Southern District of New York. Maybe I'm biased. I used to work there. But it's known for charging and getting convictions in high-profile, high-stakes case. That's what the Southern District has done for decades now. They're no strangers to this type of case. I will say, at the risk of sounding like a homer, if they bring a case, they typically have the goods. They have their case buttoned up.
All right, Ellie Honig, thank you.
Listen, R. Kelly ain't got nothing on the diddler. You understand me? Matter of fact, Diddy is Super Saiyan R. Kelly. He's R. Kelly at a completely different level. I just hope that this trial will be public so that we can all watch it, again, if he doesn't Epstein himself.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Let's get some more on this with our legal and entertainment experts. And Joey Jackson, I'll start with you. How much does it speak to the severity of these charges against Combs that the judge denied his bail?
Says everything, Wolf, for a variety of factors. Number one, certainly, generally, you would be given bail if there's any condition or combination of conditions that would ensure, A, you return to court, and B, there's an issue as to whether you're a danger to the community. Because of the manner in which the indictment was laid out, speaking about over a 16-year period, allegations with respect to what he allegedly did, it becomes problematic. Let me tell you what the concerns are very briefly. Number one, you have very motivated accusers, right? Very motivated people. We know that because they laid out the allegations in lawsuits. Lawsuits are civil in nature, not criminal, but I think that provided a treasure trove of information for the federal government to do what they did. Number two, with respect to the seizure of things, right? Evidence from his properties in California and Miami, videos, the other things in terms of Elizabeth's excellent piece moving into this, the lubricant, the cocaine, the other things that were taken, drugs, what have you. It's really concerning. And so at the end of the day, Wolf, it's going to be established with proof or not proof. But here's the last thing. This is a case, the United States of America versus Sean Combs. Why do I say that? Because a lot of other people who could have been charged in this indictment with him were not. What does that say to me as a defense attorney? That they are cooperating with the government.
Yeah,
so you have the accusers that are there giving their story, innocent until proven guilty, but you have other people who you could say were his enablers who are not being looked at by the government, who are looking at helping the government prove their case. So it says an awful lot that he's detained at this point without bail. There'll be an appeal on that issue. We'll see what a court has to say thereafter.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Lisa Bonner is with us as well. Lisa, to Joey's point, and he made very strong points, the judge said in her words, and I'm quoting her now, my concern is this is a crime that happens behind closed doors, even when pretrial services is monitoring. That's pretty chilling. What do you make of that?
Well, I make of that they really do believe that Sean Combs is a flight risk, and they also really believe that he is a danger to society. As Joey said, no, he did not act alone. So there were enablers from his employees, his coworkers, his assistants, to other people in law enforcement that have aided and abetted him in carrying out these crimes. So the judge made clear that there was nothing that she could determine that would really grant bail. Now, I wanted to point out that this is a magistrate judge, and the magistrate judge is really more ministerial in nature, meaning that tomorrow or the day after or soon thereafter, that this case will be given to the district judge who will be hearing this. Now, at that point, they will indeed his defense team will indeed try to convince the judge once again that Sean is not a flight risk and that he should be entitled to bail. I personally do not see that happening for the reasons that I mentioned, but that is what they will argue.
Interesting. Lisa Respers-France is with us as well. Lisa, that very disturbing video of Combs abusing Casey Ventura at that hotel in Los Angeles was a key point of evidence in today's hearing. How significant was that? And put into perspective for us Combs' enormous fall from grace.
It was very significant because up until Up until that point,
Sorry.
people were saying that Cassie Ventura and other people who were accusing him were lying and just going for a big payday. But here we see with our own eyes actually what happened and that her allegations were true. And so it's been very difficult for Diddy because he's a much bigger star than just hip hop. You know, people think of him in terms of being a rapper and a producer, but he had a fashion line, he had spirits, he had a restaurant. Like, Diddy is probably one of the biggest stars of our time. And so to see him go from last year in September receiving a key to the city in New York, where Diddy has literally referred to himself as the king of New York, Wolf. And so this was a big deal. And then in June, after we aired that exclusive video, Mayor Adams then asked for that key back. And so Diddy returned the key because he had to, because it became such a huge deal. Because it's one thing to be accused in a civil case or civil cases when it comes to Diddy, but it's quite another thing to see with our own eyes someone being brutally abused like Cassie Ventura was. And so consequently, Wolf, when you had that, it opened up the possibility that other people must not be lying either, is how a lot of people in the industry felt. And I personally, I don't see how he comes back from this.
Yeah, we showed our viewers some video of Combs actually receiving that key to the city of New York. Joey, you heard Combs' attorney say they're appealing this decision in a hearing tomorrow. What would they try to argue to get this bail decision reversed, and how likely is that?
So, Wolf, what they will argue is we know that at the outset of this case that he moved to New York. And what they're going to say is that, listen, he wasn't fleeing anywhere. Yes, he's well-resourced. Yes, he can go to anywhere really in the world if he wanted to. But he didn't. He came here to New York to fight the charges. Number two, in addition to coming to New York, he offered to surrender. They chose it as prosecutors to get him at the hotel. Why? That was the indication that they were going to look to detain him, right, indefinitely until the case comes. And number three, they'll argue that, yes, these are decades allegations in terms of 2008 to present, but what they will say is that, you know, he hasn't, as of late, been certainly a danger to the community, and these certainly are allegations. Last point, Wolf, and that's this. These are life-changing allegations. Every indictment is, but there's also a forfeiture provision in here, so irrespective of whether he's detained or he's out, if he's convicted on this, and it's an indictment which is a mere allegation, this has to be proven in court to be clear, but if he's convicted, the government can forfeit everything from the criminal enterprise. That is his world. That means the government could take everything and anything that was a result, right, of proceeds from who he is and what he does, entertainment or otherwise. So this could change his life as he knows it, and ultimately that's going to depend upon whether the government proves the case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Potentially, he could spend many, many years in prison, right, Joey? Maybe the rest of his life?
Without question. You're looking at potentially a 15-year mandatory minimum in addition to, it depends, of course, a life sentence. Now, in the federal government, very briefly, there are these sentencing guidelines. Sentencing guidelines are predicated upon who you are, but listen, these allegations could keep him behind the bars for a long time.
Certainly true. Lisa Bonner.
Listen, he's cooked. Change his name from Puff Daddy to Cuff Daddy. The video with Cassie, I'm gonna have to blur it out right here, explains all that you need to know about this guy. But even outside of that, you go to anybody's crib and they got 1,000 bottles of oil and lube. He's guilty. I don't care what you're accusing him from. They even got 1,000 bottles of lube inside a Johnson & Johnson warehouse, baby. But they got him at his establishment. Guilty. And he's being accused of S crimes. Guilty. Damn freak off. That sounds like a damn tournament.
Bonner, let me go back to you. In cases like this, how much do you weigh putting survivors through a trial versus exploring potentially a plea deal that could spare them having to testify?
Well, I don't foresee them really accepting a plea. At this point, there is so much evidence that is levied against him, and the indictment is very strong. It is specific, it is laid out in detail, and it is very extensive. And so when you look at that and you look at the vehement denials that Sean has given over the course of this past year, and it wasn't until the video evidence came out with Cassie Ventura, where he was seen brutally beating her, kicking her, dragging her by the hair, throwing a vase at her. And so at this point, really, he was really denying all of that. So I don't really foresee that changing. He had an opportunity at some point.
And he
knew
apologized
this was
for
coming.
it.
He still was trying to negotiate a surrender versus a plea. So I really don't think that they're going to be inclined to offer a plea, or will Sean be inclined to offer or accept one? So I do see this playing out in court, very similar to what R. Kelly did. And that was tried over just across the bridge at the Eastern District of New York. So I really do not foresee any kind of plea. And it is unfortunate for the survivors, because you are pitting them up against the evidence and having to speak on that.
All right, Lisa, thank you. Lisa, Joey, and Lisa, thanks to all of you. Appreciate it very much.
Our legal analyst is Michael Moore. Michael's with me now. Let's just deal with the, if you will, the logistics before we turn to the gravamen. The refusal of bail in these circumstances, bearing in mind he'd flown to New York to turn himself in, so he was preempted by the police. Are you surprised that he was refused bail?
Well, I'm glad to be with you. I'm not surprised at all. I mean, the nature of these charges are so serious, the allegations are so serious, that it's not surprising that this hearing he was denied bail. The judge has to look at things like whether or not he can be expected to return to court. Does he have the manner and means to perhaps evade law enforcement and not appear? Is he a flight risk, in other words? And so I think at this point, the judge has decided that the fact that he was doing these acts in secret do not obviously lend much to his statements that he will be open and available. So I'm not surprised at all. But again, we will see what the district judge now does, since the case has been, or the decision has been at least appealed up, whether or not there are some terms of bail that might make the court comfortable that he will show up for court.
Now, turning to the charges themselves, they are amongst the most serious, which would involve very long periods of incarceration if convicted. But it also raises the question, if there was a plea deal at some point in the future, to plead down from these very serious charges, the lesser accepted offences would also be serious and could end up in prison.
I think any plea discussion of the case, because you have such significant impact on the victims of the case, would necessitate that he be sentenced to prison in some way. I just don't think that a judge would take and place him on probation or some type of house arrest, given the allegations that were made, no matter what the plea discussions were. And remember, the prosecution and a defendant can negotiate a plea amongst themselves, but a court has the decision finally on whether or not to accept that recommendation, and ultimately has the authority to make a decision about whether or not a prison sentence is appropriate. We operate under the federal sentencing guidelines. Those give the judge some parameters to consider, things like whether or not somebody accepts responsibility, whether or not there have been an adverse impact on victims, whether or not there's been excessive fraud and deceit through the investigation of the case. Those things come into play as we talk about what might happen if there is a plea agreement that's ultimately reached.
It's important to remember, besides obviously he's innocent until proven guilty at the moment, but it's also important to remember that not being a nice person, being an unnice person, if you will, is not a crime. They're going to have to prove the elements of the offences in these cases. Yeah. Just because he might not be likable is not enough to get you locked up.
Well, crazy shit is that he was very likable right before all of this stuff came out. And I'd say that the internet was split right before that Cassie video came out. I mean, shit, he got the key to the city in New York just last year. But I think what is so shocking regarding this is how public of a figure that he is, and that he was able to do this for 20, 30 years. And if he was not a person that people legitimately feared, these allegations would have came out a long time ago. But these people are scared for themselves as well as their family. Let's not forget what happened to Kim Porter, who was scheduled to write a tell-all book, and then all of a sudden she passed away at like 40-something years old.
I mean, that's exactly right. And this is an indictment. These are merely allegations, and he has a right to have his case tried in court, and the government has to prove that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The indictment, the allegations we heard from the United States Attorney in New York, these are sordid details. They are particularly troubling as it relates to whether or not the allegations are true, on whether or not certain people, victims in the case, were given drugs at the time to get them to do these sex acts.
They have
whether or
to
not
prove
there's been
that.
some effort to blackmail or extort or silence victims in the case by the use of videotaped, and to call it pornography would probably be too nice. I would just say dark type of pornography. It sounds like, these are things that a judge is going to have to consider as we go forward.
They have to be able to prove that it's not just somebody who had a lot of money and engages in freak off parties, was having a good time, and it was consenting adults, some of which he hired to come in, right? But that's not what they're alleging here. They're alleging criminal organization funded by the assets and resources of his business or his brand, utilized to fraud, to coerce, that he gave and he fed these people drugs so that they are not in a position to consent. And my assumption is that if Homeland Security or the feds are indicting him, then they have sufficient evidence. Now, while I say that, I also look at the YSL trial and I look at their star witness, Woody, being put upon. And if they thought that was enough to go to trial, could there be an error in their ways here? I would say it's less likely because they have video recorded by him, knowingly or unknowingly by these same participants.
Finally, back to the logistics, if you will. He was prepared to turn himself in today, so we understand. The arrest removed from him the almost right to bail. Since I was going to turn myself in, I'm entitled to bail if I'd had turned myself in. By arresting him, the prosecution removed that possibility.
Well, they certainly removed the argument for him to make that he had turned himself in. It's mighty hard to, when you fly into town on a jet and you're there, to argue that there's no possible way you could be a flight risk. And that's one of the things the judge would consider. Another thing would be the nature of the charges, the allegations that were made. They spanned a long period of time. There were efforts to influence witnesses, it sounds like. At least that's been an allegation that has been made. These are all things that get put into that decision. The fact that he just would have turned himself in, that would have been in his favor. But there are so many other factors at play that it wouldn't have surprised me to see a court dig into those a little bit in making a decision whether bail would be appropriate. And at this stage, a judge has determined that bail is not appropriate. He has a right, and has done apparently so, to appeal that decision and have another hearing on it. At that time, his lawyers will have a chance to make these arguments about the efforts that he was making to cooperate and to get there. The term cooperation, frankly, sometimes gets to be a little loosey-goosey, depending on who's wanting to use the argument to their benefit.
I think one of the most interesting things in the forthcoming case will be who is going to come up to speak against Diddy, whether it be famous entertainers, musicians, actors, people that were at his party, seen on video, all the way down to officers of the law that had something to do with the cover-ups. Hollywood is in trouble, baby. These degenerate people utilizing degeneracy in order to make a buck. Could all of this bullshit, all this dark energy, dark arts bullshit finally be coming to a head within Hollywood? Very possibly. Nevertheless, I think Diddy is guilty as sin, but I'm gonna continue uncovering this case as more information comes to light. Stay locked to the channel so we can go over it. Questions, comments, concerns, y'all already know what to do. Mediocre tutorials and reviews at gmail.com. Guys, leave me your comments down below. Let's talk about this one, and I will see you soon. Until next time, YouTube, peace.